Okay, now you just start talking.
Okay.
Just like normal voice, like you're talking to me.
Right. This is Zellie Mae Anderson Dowdell, my godmother.
Okay, let me stop that.
My throat.
Okay. Hi Ron, how you doing?
Okay, how are you?
I'm good.
Good.
All right, let's try that.
Okay. Maybe I can clean this table off a little, you know, out anything that's within range and get rid of it. Oh, come on.
This is January the 19th, Saturday, 2008. And this is Ron Kruvant.
Let's try Kruvant. That's the way we pronounce it.
Kruvant. And my name is Charles Wright. And the reason that we're here today is because both of us want to separate truth from fiction. And Ron and I both know that UFOs exist, and we're not here to debunk the reality of UFOs at all.
Amen.
We simply want to separate the little bit of BS that we happen to know is fiction that has gotten itself into the literature, the published literature, and so forth. And that was introduced by Ron's older brother, Michael Wolf Kruvant. And it was introduced in 1996 when he published a book called Catchers of Heaven. And Catchers of Heaven, it's called a Trilogy by Michael, and that's the front cover. And then the back cover is a mysterious photo of a man that Ron thinks he knows who that person or where that picture came from, because Michael showed him a book that he thinks that picture came from. And then after 1996, after the book was circulated and people started to read it, then information was passed around in the form of what we call circular knowledge. When people do not go below the surface and investigate it, they just pass it around, and it catches on, and it grows and it grows and it grows. And we have several pieces of evidence here that show that. And I think it'll be a lot easier if I just hold this camera and point it at the literature. It's instead of trying to hold it up in front of the camera. So let's do it this way. First of all, we have Paoli Harris's book called Connecting the Dots, and there's a whole chapter devoted to Michael, starting on page 91, and he's called Dr. Michael Wolf. And then there's a picture that she found on his wall in his apartment that he says he was in a film in Italy done by Fellini. So there's a whole chapter devoted to Michael in her book. And so that added to the information. And this was published in, let's see, what year was that published? Where's the date there? 2003. So it was 7 years after Michael's book. And then there's 2 DVDs that are available. This one's called Dr. Michael Wolf and the Gateway Treatment. That's one DVD. The other one, Dr. Michael Wolf, Keepers of Cosmic Secrets. So those are 2 DVDs. And the most recent publication that is telling Michael's story that he started is Shirley MacLaine's brand new book. And on page 135 of her book, Saging While Aging, 135, she talks about him, and 1 37, she talks about. So the story has a life of its own, and it just keeps going. So there's some publications, and then on the internet there are a lot of things that are published on the internet. If you use Google search, you'll discover that there's a lot of people. There's Dr. Richard Boylan's. He has quite a bit of stuff published about him, and it just goes on and on and on and on. So that'll give you an idea of some of this stuff. Now I want to show you the timeline that Ron and I are going to talk about, just to give you a brief outline. Michael was born in 1941, on July 4th, 1941. And then he graduated from high school, which is just across the street, in 1959. And then he was hospitalized for a while. And then he lived up in Hartford, Connecticut. And then he passed away in the year 2000. So that's what we're going to do, is we're going to go over this outline and talk about the real Michael Wolf Kruvant. So let's begin that. I'll be able to edit this with the software that I have at home. So these pauses like this will be able to cut out. So let's start. All right, Michael was born July 4th, 1941. Do you remember where he was born?
Newark, New Jersey.
Newark, New Jersey. Okay. And then at some point in his early life, Michael experienced a very mean father. And what would you like to say about that?
He was abusive. He was brutal. He was homophobic. And he was determined to either make his kids or break them. And when it came to playing ball, we'd go out in the yard, and my brother was a good deal taller than I was, being 2 years older. And he was afraid of the ball, whereas I was not. So my father noticed that and threw the ball hard at him. And he was so afraid that he would wind up turning his back and getting hit with the ball. And this infuriated my father more, and it turned into a vicious circle. And this is one of the tools my father used to break my brother. One of the other things was we would go walking out in nature. We went to the reservation, and our father told us to cross over a plank that was set up over a narrow gully. It wasn't very much for an adult, but for little kids it was a lot. So I crossed it quite easily, and Michael couldn't. And my father was goading him on, and eventually my brother cracked, and he would start laughing hysterically. And I felt pretty bad for him. Soon after that kind of thing went on for quite a while, and soon after my brother started abusing me.
Okay.
Physically, mentally, whatever he could do to either upset me or hurt me, that's what he did. You were saying?
Okay. And then at some point, he created a lab in the basement.
Right. My father bought all his equipment and white mice. My brother decided he was going to do cancer experiments on the white mice, and he would abrase the skin, shave the area and abrase the skin, use a scalpel, and apply coal tar. It wasn't long before they developed cancer, or what he saw as signs of cancer. And he would record these dates and results, and then he would kill the mice, put them out of their misery. So that was the extent of his cancer experiments. My brother read quite a lot. He read a lot of medical material, whatever was available to him, and so did I. Unfortunately, my brother was starting to unravel mentally, and he just couldn't keep it together. So there were things that he tried, like becoming an actor, which my father tried at a young age. My father tried that himself, and he failed. My brother seemed to fail, and he wanted to go to Italy. He thought he could get into a Fellini movie. So, from what I understand, he said he was in AF, which is the title of a particular movie. And all I could see as evidence of that was a sheet. When he returned home, there was a picture that he had of someone with a sheet over his head. He had spent all the money that they'd sent him, and they had to pay to get him back. They paid his fare home, and he was still unraveling.
Okay. So let's go back in time and stay with his earlier age. During the time when he was doing biology and chemistry in the basement, also at some point he made a pulsing light that was hooked up to a microphone.
Right.
And do you remember anything about that?
This was after we had seen a UFO.
Okay. Go ahead and talk about that UFO then, that you saw.
It was in broad daylight in the afternoon on a clear sunny day. And I noticed my brother pointing at this place in the sky, and I looked, and there was a UFO. And it was amazing. So I just watched it, and Michael started to run toward the house, and he yelled, "I'm going to get my camera." And he went in, and he never came out. I waited until the UFO passed. I couldn't really avoid staying with it to see what was next. I was riveted to the spot. And when it passed, I went down into the basement after looking upstairs for Michael. I found him in the corner of a bar that was set up in the basement. It's like a darkened area with a lamp in the corner and a bar in the corner, and he was underneath, and he was terrified.
Okay.
And I asked him, was he all right? And he just stared at me, and I went upstairs. I didn't try to get him out of where he was, all crouched down in the back of this bar underneath. That's about it. There wasn't any mention in the newspapers that I know of.
And then you say you think there was 3 other people in addition to you
I
and
know
Michael?
there's 3 others. I met one. He just retired from the fire department locally, and he was with 2 other men. And my brother and I, that makes 5 that we know of. So one of the members of that 3 passed on, my brother's passed on, so there's 3 left. Out of contact with each other. No one wants to really talk about it.
Okay. And then at some point after that time, or after that event, Ron and Michael created the FSRA, Flying Saucer Research Association.
Yeah.
And that makes you smile. Why does it make you smile?
I was pretty much into it. I was enthusiastic and thinking I was doing something good, and that my brother would probably be instrumental in doing something that was interesting, and I was certainly interested. And I was sure that other people would be interested too.
Mm-hmm.
So I made up a little card that had that on it, and I drew a picture of George Adamski's UFO, and it's a nice little card. I don't know whatever happened with it or to it. It was just a childhood, the kind of things that kids do.
Mm-hmm.
Soon after, my brother wanted to go to Washington and visit the Pentagon and look at Project Blue Book. And this was very convenient for my father because he had a cousin who lived in Washington. He was a starving artist, literally. And we went down to visit the starving artist. It's Uncle Maurice. He painted a picture of my mother, which was great. So I knew he was a painter, and he was a kindly man. While visiting him, the car got completely smashed. It was totaled at the curb by a person who was driving erratically, and so we had to rent a car to come back. But before we left, we visited the Pentagon and went through just what you would expect, a visit to see Project Blue Book, and that was it. Of course, Project Blue Book doesn't really say anything, and I guess that satisfied Michael, and it satisfied my father in that he did what he promised as far as my brother wanting to see it. So we got to visit the Pentagon and many other landmarks. And then we came home.
I wonder how your father got in the Pentagon. Did he know somebody there?
No.
No?
No one at all.
No one at all?
No.
Okay.
Just as a citizen, you were allowed at that time to visit the Pentagon.
Oh, all right.
All you need is a pass.
Oh, okay.
And you can go and you can look at Project Blue Book, or, I mean, at that time you could do that.
Oh, all right.
Not anymore, but that's the way it was.
Another thing that happened because of you seeing the UFO here in was it in Maplewood?
Actually, it was on the South Orange border.
Okay.
On Scotland Road.
Do you think that Michael was inspired by that event to create that pulsing light to communicate with aliens that was attached to a microphone that he spoke into?
I think that he had read something about communications, and he took the materials, the technical materials, whatever it was, from a transmitter, a radio transmitter that he had put together with my father's help, and he wound up being able to make fluctuations by using a microphone and a very low current battery, battery pack, an ever-ready battery pack. Couldn't have been more than 12 volts. And the head of a flashlight, all taped up together. And with this, we went out several times, and he would request that the UFOs would come over and fly over. Of course, we never saw anything. but it really didn't dim our enthusiasm, didn't dim his enthusiasm, and I enjoyed being out, and I was hoping that somehow doing things with my brother would create a brother.
Now somehow this got written up in a book, and before I came over here I looked on the internet trying to find the name of the book because I wanted to document it. But there's a book that was published probably in the 50s or the 60s that mentions Michael doing this.
Uh-huh.
I don't know if if anyone ever mentioned that to you or not over the years.
No.
And I'm just wondering how that author became aware of Michael doing that. That's curious.
I don't know, but I know it wasn't successful. It certainly wasn't powerful enough to be noticed by even an airplane passing over at a low altitude.
Mm-hmm.
It just wasn't possible.
Okay. All right, let's jump now, because I think we've covered, if we jump to the graduation, is there anything else that you want to add in before 1959 when he graduated from high school?
Yeah, I think that there was some mention of him seeing a UFO on his way home from being bar mitzvahed.
Yes, that's in his book.
A block away from where we lived was Temple Israel. And we drove home. My father usually drove back and forth to Temple, and on that occasion of his bar mitzvah, we all drove back together. There was no time in which Michael could have been alone to have an experience like that.
Okay. Well, he graduated just across the street from where we are right now, from Columbia High School in Maplewood, New Jersey in 1959. And then shortly after that, he went to a college that is now closed called Uppsala College. And we think he was there for about a year and a half. I've seen the transcript. I don't have it right now. And then he either quit or he flunked out. And then he went to the American Academy of Dramatic Arts in New York City for a while.
Right.
And your father was instrumental in encouraging him to go there?
Yes.
And that's because your father also had acting interests, desires?
Yeah, really, yeah.
Okay. And then after that, he went to Italy for a while.
Right.
And then he ran out of money, and when he came back to the States, his homosexuality was in full bloom.
Yeah.
To say it in a respectful way,
Yeah.
because we don't want to say anything derogatory at all.
No one treated him badly about it except for my father.
Yeah.
Yeah, my father was enraged. He never really said anything, but you could tell he was fuming. He really was enraged under the surface all the time. Whenever you looked at him, you'd look at him walking in an effeminate way, and it just tore it up.
Okay.
Because my father used to really, he would make fun of gay people. I mean, he would talk like them and everything. He would imitate them.
Oh.
Really, maybe my father had a sexual experience early on. Who knows? I'm not suggesting he did. I'm not suggesting he didn't. But he was certainly antagonistic toward my brother for that reason.
Okay.
And we'd go up in an airplane. My father flew a Piper Cub, and we went up a few times. And the first time, my brother just was terrified, and he vomited. It made my father more angry than anything else. And he begged to be left alone to go home. And the same occurred when we went out on a boat. My father had a 31-foot Chris Craft.
Hmm.
And
Whereabouts would you go?
Manasquan,
Oh.
South Jersey. I heard a story from a cousin that my brother had told him that he had discussions with aliens down in Manasquan on weekends. I thought that was rather interesting.
Hmm.
Of course, he never went to Manasquan without my father.
Hmm.
He never went anywhere without being taken to wherever he was going.
And where would Michael have been when he told that story? Up in Hartford?
When he told that story, I was telling that to my cousin John.
Uh-huh.
And he told him in the laboratory in the basement of our house, our
Oh.
apartment.
Oh.
It is a 3-story apartment, with addition, and it was a garden apartment. It's quite big, very large, 3 bathrooms.
Okay. It just dawned on me. I didn't show the page out of the yearbook. This is the yearbook, and there's a picture of Michael in the lower right-hand corner, and that's the write-up. And it says that you lived at 764 Scotland Road in South Orange.
Well, actually, technically it was Orange.
Oh, Orange?
That's what caused a lot of problems.
Okay. And then it says here that he was a member of the Chemistry Club, the Forum Romanum, the Pan American Club, the Platform Club, the Biology Club, Friendly Conversation, a Genial Personality, and a Chemistry Enthusiast. So that's from the 1959 yearbook, which is in the library across the street, that we found last week. I think it was last week. Okay. So we went to Upsala College, and then the American Academy of Dramatic Arts, and then
Right.
Italy, and back home.
Right.
And then we have a legal document that we found at the Morris County Library. And what I want to do is read some excerpts from this court case. And the court case, this particular one, was started in 1967, and then it was finalized in 1968. And prior to that, we need to fill in the gap by saying that your father, Norman, left your mom, Gladys, at some point, and he remarried, and your mom remarried. And it was after that your mom needed financial help from your father to help pay for Michael's hospitalization expenses.
Yes.
And so she had to take your father to court and try to get more money. And that's the whole purpose of this legal case. And the reason that we're bringing this up is because it has information in here from some people. What I'm going to do is move the camera so I can point it to the page that I'm reading, and then just read from that. It's easier that way. And this is in volume 100 of the reports of cases argued and determined in the Superior Court, Appellate Division, County Courts of the State of New Jersey. And this was published in 1968. When this was published, Michael would have been probably 17. No, he would have been 26 or 27 years old. So he was well into his adulthood. Okay, we're back to the court case here. And what I want to do is read some of the sections that talk about Michael during this period of time, shortly after he came back from Italy. And this will give you an idea of what Michael was struggling with. Divorced with wife seeking modification of provisions for support of son, failed to establish in moving papers that adult son, who was so disabled as to be incapable of maintaining himself because of mental illness, was incapable of self-support because of emotional illness at time of attaining majority. So that's within the synopsis of the case at the very beginning, talking about Michael's situation. The plaintiff, which would be Gladys, and the defendant, which would be Norman, were married in Newark, New Jersey on February the 13th, 1939. 3 children were born of the marriage: Michael, Ronald, and a sister. Arnie Beth. I didn't know if you wanted to say her name or not. Okay.
We're going to have to talk about her anyway.
Okay. Judgment awarding, it says, a judgment nisi awarding plaintiff a divorce on the ground of desertion was entered on April the 29th, 1958 and became final July 30th, 1958. Okay. On September 12, 1966, plaintiff filed her present motion to reopen the judgment in the divorce action to modify the provisions for the support of Michael, who was then 25 years old, and to compel reimbursement to her for monies already expended in his behalf. In her moving affidavit, she alleged that he suffered from an emotional illness or mental disorder which had pre-existed the divorce and had continued during his minority. It had become so bad during the 1963 to 65 period that it had been necessary to summon the East Orange police. Michael was then living there on 6 occasions, 2 of which resulted in his hospitalization. She also alleged that he had required constant psychiatric treatment and had been at one time hospitalized at the Carrier Clinic, a private mental institution located in Belmead, New Jersey. It was further alleged that by the latter part of 1965, Michael had withdrawn from all interpersonal relationships, had lost weight, and was suffering from depression and blackout spells. He had been unable to complete his college education or obtain employment, and generally demonstrated an inability to function normally in society. She thereupon argued for Michael's hospitalization at the Institute of Living, an internationally recognized private psychiatric institution at Hartford, Connecticut, where he had been a patient from December the 3rd, 1965 until the date of her moving papers. He continued there through December 1966. The basic cost of maintenance and treatment there was $245 per week, and plaintiff had expended a total of $12,821 for that purpose up to December 1st, 1966. She alleged that she had been advised by the Institute staff that the type of individualized treatment that Michael's condition required was not available at state or county psychiatric institutions. The diagnosis was depression reaction in a passive-aggressive personality, passive-dependent type. In September 1966, the psychiatric in chief there reported that Michael Kruvant has a history of withdrawal from interpersonal relationships, inability to complete his college education or to obtain gainful employment, depression, and an apparently severe characterologic problem involving overuse of medication. He continues to manifest this type of adaptation, although in a somewhat improved manner as compared to the time of his admission. It was his opinion that if Michael was to leave the hospital at that time, he would be unable to function either in a college or occupational setting. She alleges that it had been suggested on defendant's behalf as an alternative that Michael would be better off in a state-operated mental institution such as Overbrook Hospital in Cedar Grove, and an offer had been made on his behalf to arrange for Michael's admission there. In the absence of financial aid from defendant, plaintiff averred that although she had managed up to then to pay for Michael's hospitalization at the institute through personal funds and by borrowing from other sources, including the bank accounts and bonds of Michael, Ronald, and Arnie Beth, she was no longer able to carry the burden. At the time of the hearing on the motion, Michael was scheduled for release from the institute and was to be treated thereafter on an outpatient basis, thus substantially reducing the cost of his care. At the oral argument, we were advised that he was no longer under treatment. Dr. Samuel Martin, a psychiatrist connected with the Essex County Probation Department, the latter testified that Michael could be adequately treated at Overbrook, but conceded that care at the institute would be better. The motion was resisted on the grounds substantially that defendant was no longer obligated to maintain his adult son. If such obligation existed, it could not be enforced in the present proceedings, and he should not be required to pay for Michael's care in the institute at $245 a week when adequate care was available at Overbrook at $68 a week. So there's the information about Michael's status. Okay, go ahead.
As Michael turned inward, away from his problems, which were mostly his father and his fears, UFO being one of his fears. He had watched a lot of science fiction movies on television and a couple of movies outside, and we had seen quite a bit on aliens and science fiction topics. When Michael was, let's see, I'm not exactly sure how old he was at that time when he watched Flash Gordon, and one of the characters was Ming the Merciless.
Oh yeah, that's right, Ming the Merciless.
And there was a hole being dug for a swimming pool in a backyard. There was a tremendous mound of dirt, soil, that was dug up and deposited right next to the area where the pool was going to be built. And one afternoon I saw Michael standing atop this mound of dirt with a cape on, and he was waving a wand or a ray gun or something. I'm not exactly sure what it was at this point, but he was Ming the Merciless, and he was behaving aggressively to no one visible. And I realized that Michael was all there at the time. This was not just a child's game. It was something more. At one point, we had both seen a movie called, I believe it was The Dark Tower, with Herbert Lom. He played a wandering transient type who came upon a circus, and he was hired by the circus because he could hypnotize people. And Michael tried to hypnotize me a whole lot of times, even took out a book from the library on hypnosis, and tried many different ways to see what his influence was, what kind of power he had. And I think that if the inquisitive mind sees this particular movie, he might understand how it was easy for Michael to think of himself as a doctor. Well, that would be for his future. He would become a doctor with all altruistic motives in mind. However, there were a lot of things standing in his way. It seems that Herbert Lom became the main key to the circus, and he was passive-aggressive, just like Michael was, and very influential, and he started to exert his influence on the different characters in this movie. And you have to see the movie to understand that Herbert Lom called himself what is this? Steve Torg. That was his name. So he called himself Dr. Stephen Torg. And it became very interesting that he used his eyes a lot. He was very powerful in some way that only he could see. But if people believed it, they could be hypnotized. Unfortunately, he was never able to hypnotize me or anyone else that I know of. Michael was really involved in picking up every bit of information on UFOs, science fiction, aliens, things on other planets, what the possibilities were, and all about the universe. I think Michael was looking for a place for him in the universe. So,
Okay. After Michael was released from the institute there in Hartford, the Institute for Living, we need to also mention that you were living up in that area as well,
right.
for quite a while, so that you knew what Michael was doing over a period of years, and you didn't leave the area until 1979.
Right.
So Michael would have been 38 years old. So you can personally vouch and account for his whereabouts, where he lived, what he was doing, and so forth.
Yes.
I was looking at my outline here. I have Fabrics National as one possible place of employment. What do you remember about that?
Michael told me that I should apply there. He was working there, and I did. And I was working there. Within 6 months, I had caught pneumonia, and I was dismissed. And gradually lost a lot of weight, and just I couldn't take care of myself. So, fortunately, I knew a lady who was very influential, and she made sure that I had an apartment and that I was taken care of with the bare minimums. You know, enough food to eat and a roof over my head.
Wow.
That really was great.
Okay.
I had the pneumonia. I was ill for about 90 days, 80 days, 90 days, thereabouts. And during that time, I started to try to get close to Michael, you know, to see if we could become brothers, or if he could be a brother to me. I knew I was a brother to him. I always tried to treat him nicely. I was nothing but good to him all the way through, but somehow he treated me like an enemy all the way through. And this went on until the time of his passing.
Wow.
It was, one minute he was happy and he was glad I was there, and I was bringing him things from his mother and myself. I was doing whatever I could for him. And he just would turn around and it was just like he was bothered by everything. He was being intruded upon, especially as he grew ill and he was dying. That was a time when I think he was influenced by some people who were connected with this children's foundation, which he made up. That was a pretty rotten thing to do. I didn't really know about it when Michael called me up in Florida. I was married and living in Florida. And Michael called me up. I had a ceramics business. And Michael said he needed my help. And I always did whatever I could for him, including taking him to the hospital on occasion when he overdosed on whatever he was taking. Let's see.
Now, when Michael called you up, and this is something that's important that we do need to emphasize, he asked you to help him because he had published the book.
Yeah, I didn't really know what the book contained, and I didn't know there was a children's foundation involved. I didn't really know that much about it, but I knew that he wanted my help, and that I could be helpful just in supporting him, and supporting whatever he said. And I lied for him. And I think I sacrificed my integrity at that time in order to do what I thought would be of some help to him. If I'd realized the magnitude of his lies, including one which I saw on a CD, whereupon he says that my sister Arnie was mentally ill and had to be taken care of. I think that was a terrible criminal thing for him to say. It was just sick, very sick. Because Arnie was fine. There's nothing wrong with her. And as soon as she got out of college, she was making enough money to take care of herself. She'd been married. There was no reason for him to behave that way, to say the things that he said. Only it seems to me that he was protecting himself because he essentially was the one who needed help, mentally and financially.
I think when you look at the context of his comment, he was saying that because an investigator in the UFO community had called Arnie to verify if Michael was on the up and up, if Michael was telling the truth.
Yes.
And so, of course, Arnie didn't know what the situation was, and so she was telling
about it.
She was telling the real truth about Michael's
Arnie always told the truth.
True character. And so Michael was trying to cover up for himself by saying, well, no, you can't trust what Arnie is saying, because he was saying that she was mentally ill.
That's what he said on the DVD.
Yeah. So it was...
And, that kid...
That's what he was doing.
In spite of everything, and she had a lot going against her, she had to really fight to become the woman that she is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I've always been proud of her. There's nothing but truth in her.
So he was willing to...
She never lied about anything.
He was willing to lie about his sister just to continue his own fiction.
Yeah.
And hurt her publicly with those comments. And at the time when you were covering up for him, you didn't know exactly what he was doing, and you were just trying to do a brotherly thing and help him out. And you had no idea that this was going to blossom and bloom like this and take off and become a story of its own that circulated. Here we are 12 years later, and now it's still circulating on its own.
Yeah. Michael asked me to support whatever he had to say, and I said, I'll support whatever. If somebody tells me something, if it sounds good, I'll agree with them. Yeah, I even gave him little tips that he could use for whatever he wanted to, whatever stories he wanted to tell. Like, for instance, that he was in Vietnam. I told him to say that he was in country, and that would be the magic key for him to get past all those scary questions, like, were you in Vietnam? In country just covers a whole lot of bases. So I agreed with people that called me down in Florida. I spent a lot of time on the telephone, just sacrificing my integrity and lying. Half truths, like, well, was Michael intelligent? Oh yeah, vastly, things like that. And I just contributed to his delinquency, his mental delinquency. However, I really didn't know the degree to which this stuff went. This was really scary. After Michael passed on, I read the book, and I read that he said that he was married and that he had children. It's just incredible. It didn't make sense to me. He said it was fiction. But then I started reading things like the book jacket. He was not an advisor to anyone, unless the Kennedys. He didn't join the service. He wasn't in the Air Force. I know that. There's not much to say for him. He was. I think the story goes, the saying goes in what was it, The Talented Mr. Ripley. It's better to be a what? A fake something than a real nothing. So I think that he had that on his mind all the time, and he was going to lie as he always had been, lying. It seemed to work for him.
And the strange thing, and it's hard for me to understand this, but when you look at the people in the UFO community, there are at least two that I know of that are highly respected and seem to be very credible, but they have taken Michael's story and run with it. And here's a paragraph, for example. I just printed this off the internet before I came over here. It says, Dr. Michael Wolf has, since 1979, served, in 1979 in fact, and this is a picture of a building in Hartford, Connecticut. And Michael was living in Hartford, and so was Ron. And that's a picture of a roof that collapsed. And what was the name of the building?
That was the Hartford Civic Center. I was working in an artist's loft about 150 feet away on on Allen Street. And when that thing gave way, about 4 or 5 in the morning, somewhere around that time, I had taken pictures out the window with the camera. I was 4 stories up, so I got a pretty good view and good photographs. But the experience was very unique, to say the least, because it was just as you would imagine a nuclear bomb had hit. But before noon that morning, Michael was down. His boyfriend dropped him off, whoever he was living with at the time. His name was John. John what? I don't remember. And Michael was just fascinated by this destruction. He was really interested in it. Wow, big deal.
And so that's what Michael was doing in 1979 in reality. You and he both were living there in Hartford.
True.
Now, according to this fiction, it says Dr. Michael Wolff has since 1979 served as consultant to the President and the National Security Council on extraterrestrial matters and a member of the Majestic 12, MJ-12, UFO Secrecy Management Agency's Special Studies Group, and he has been leader of its lead agency, the Alpha Com Team. Previously, he has served as an Air Force colonel, pilot, flight surgeon, and counterintelligence officer for the CIA and NSA. He has an MD in neurology, a PhD in theoretical physics, and a DSc in computer science. He is not a lightweight. Now dying of untreatable cancer, Dr. Wolff has decided to reveal what he has learned about the visiting extraterrestrial cultures to the world. It just goes on and on.
He
and on.
only learned and spoke of what he read and heard. There was no personal experience of anything
Exactly.
outside of a UFO that he didn't even remember. He did not really remember the experience itself, which I find very interesting. He could not remember it, no matter how I described it to him. And once in a while, through the years, I would mention it to him. Do you remember what happened and so forth? Description and everything. He didn't have a clue.
So he blocked it out.
Yeah, he blocked it out, but his interest in UFOs was amazing. It was tremendous. It was tremendous.
And so after 1979, when you left Hartford, then we've got from 79 to 96 is when he published the book. And then that's when I became aware of Michael, because Bill Hamilton asked me to look into this and research him. And the very first thing that I did was I found out how many Kruvants there were, mailed out letters to all of those families asking them what they could tell me about Michael. And there was one stepsister in Florida that responded and told me that all of that could not possibly be true at all, because she knew for a fact that he had been living in Hartford most of his life during all those crucial years. And
Excuse me.
yeah.
When I was in Hartford, I would say from the time, let's say, from 1969, from that point on, he would live in apartments with various boyfriends, and he never left Hartford. He came down to New Jersey once.
Wow.
He never left Hartford otherwise. In the last few years of his life, he didn't leave his apartment. He was depending on other people to take care of him, especially my mother. She was supporting him all the way through.
Well, we have on here that he was on the Meals on Wheels route.
Yes.
People would take to his apartment.
Yes.
So that's the true lifestyle that he was living.
No.
And I think to be fair, this was his way of coping with reality, was creating an internal fantasy life, which is normal. I think a lot of people do that to counterbalance the reality that's staring them in the face.
Okay.
And he was good at that.
Oh, very good, unless he wasn't being good at that. And when he wasn't being good at it, he was in the middle of a mental crisis. Let's take 1978. Within the time frame of 3 to 4 years, I had taken him to St. Francis Hospital. He had overdosed. His boyfriend called me. I was working at the time at the Strong Craft Gallery. And I had my own work in the Strong Craft Gallery, and I was working. And I was enjoying life as much as possible, with the exception of periodically having to deal with Michael. His boyfriend called me and asked me to come over, that Michael had taken an overdose of what he didn't know. I didn't know either. There was a bottle of pills. I didn't know what they were. He had taken most of the label off. and he was barely conscious. I carried him down to my car, and I drove him to St. Francis Hospital, and they almost lost him. As we were going in, I heard he's going sour, and I figured that out pretty quickly. And I was very upset, and I think mostly because I'd had enough of this. It's like a lifetime of personal crises on his behalf. I would take action, and it would be like the boy who cried wolf. So I took him in, and they thought they were losing him, and they didn't lose him. They told me it was okay to visit with him, that he was in the room, he was awake. They had pumped his stomach out, and he was sitting there laughing, having a good time. And it made me angry. I still couldn't figure him out. And this kind of thing happened early on. He would take alcohol with whatever depressants or downers or Miltowns or Sebas or cough medicine with codeine in it. Whatever he could get to half knock him out or knock him out entirely. He was always talking about suicide. And I feel that my mother was really very unhappy about this. She just couldn't take anymore. Anyway, after that, he went to Hartford Hospital at one point because he thought he had AIDS. He called me up and told me that he needed to be picked up because he couldn't just walk away. He had to be driven out. I guess that was their policy. So I picked him up, and he told me that he had AIDS and so forth. I really didn't know. I don't think he had AIDS. That he had more going on mentally than anything else, and a drug problem and an alcohol problem. The day that the Hartford Civic Center roof fell in, collapsed because of the weight of snow and ice from the night before.
And that was January the 18th, 1970.
All right. 78.
78.
Michael came down, his boyfriend dropped him off, and he came up and he was looking around, and he was just about hanging out the window. And I told him, just come out of the window. I didn't feel that it was safe. And I had already smelled alcohol on him, and it was as though he was a little bit drunk or something. And he gave a scream, as though it was, when a person falls out of a window on purpose.
Mm-hmm.
You think that, naturally they're going to scream when they realize they can't come back up. And that was the kind of a scream it was. And he gave that out, and it was just like he was back sick as he was before. It seemed like he had returned to that state mentally. He spoke about committing suicide. He said he would do it if he had the pills. What pills he was referring to, I didn't know.
Okay, this one's running out of time.
Okay.
So we gotta stop this one. Okay, we're good to go.
I was talking about that day that the roof fell in, the Hartford Civic Center roof collapsed.
Yeah.
Michael was up in my loft area. He had screamed. I don't know whether he was trying to shake me up or whether he had some sudden impulse to pretend that he was a suicide, like jumping out a fourth-story window. I don't really know, but shortly thereafter, same afternoon, he went into my area, where, not a working area, but a private area, and he picked up a military knife that I had, and he pretended he was going to cut himself, and I told him to put it down, and he did reluctantly. It was just like I had interfered with the game that he was playing. And it was almost like he was a child again or something. It just seemed like he was a little boy. Anyway, I felt sorry for him my entire life. And I think I should have been a whole lot angrier than I am, and than I was. In spite of the fact that at one point he tried to drown me. He was stopped by my grandmother. He tried to shoot me. It was an accident. It could have been called an accident when we were at a gun range. My father had given me a .22 pistol. And my brother grabbed my wrist, and I was shooting it. Michael grabbed my wrist. He said, "It's my turn." And as he said that, he started to point the gun toward my face.
Wow.
And my father said, "Hey, cut it out." Just like that, and that was the final word, so he let go. But sometimes I wonder what would have happened. And I think I know what would have happened. It was an accidental death in the family. And I'm glad it didn't happen. He tried to kill himself so many times, I really don't know how many times in reality that he tried it, that he attempted it. The Lord knows he took enough pills and alcohol and cough medicine to kill an army. But he never seemed to function on any level where he could be honest and feel empathy toward his fellow human beings, in spite of whatever was on that DVD. What was the name of it? Oh yeah, Keeper of Cosmic Secrets. And during that, he's so wiped out on drugs or whatever. I mean, his slurring, it was obviously messed up. And if you look at his body language, and here's a man that's so obviously lying.
He looks like he's playing with the guy that's interviewing him.
You know, I got the impression that he was having fun.
Yeah.
And he was like almost what you would call brown nosing. The man was saying, "Oh, you know more than I thought you could have found out. You really," you know, things like that. Like Michael didn't know anything, just what he's read and what he's seen in the media.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, most of the things are straight out of the movies or television. So I'd like to really apologize to everyone for my lapse in judgment, for my lying along with Michael. It was a big mistake. I just don't want everyone else to have to pay for this kind of mistake by sending in money to a foundation that's not functional. It doesn't really exist. There is no Daniel Wolf. There never was a wife. There never was children. And Michael didn't have any of the entitlements that he felt he had. His diplomas and his whatever he had, he didn't have. And if anyone wants to speak with me further on it, please call me. I'll take the time to speak with you. And any specific questions you have, I'd appreciate trying to make it clearer. My phone number is 973-762-4635. My cell phone number is 973-900-7917. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron.
Thank you, Charles.